wisdom is joining the conversation, and the conversation is being anchored in, it's the woman's body. It's the woman that we're looking at here. This is why we end up clashing, because as believers, we come in and we're just all about the unborn, and we don't see her. Correct. And you come into ones that don't have your similar worldview, and they have the woman on their mind. And so here we are, like, up in arms fighting with one another, when really, if as believers we could come and look at her and see the woman and agree that it's her choice, it's her body, she's going through something, then we start the conversation with a completely different framework.
Yeah.
And then now our worldview is not clashing as, vividly, but we're kind of stepping into the conversation with a different route, but we're all after the same thing.
And I would take it even a step further. I would say non-believers too, like that we finding middle ground, because I actually feel, I felt this from the minute I walked in there, that we're fighting the same battle. We're just using different weapons or using different words, or we're coming against each other because it becomes about a wrong and a right thing versus about the woman. And I really believe that both sides of the line, pro-life, pro-choice, if you get them together, they're going to tell you about the woman. They're going to tell you about her. And we're all fighting the same battle, but we're using such different terminology that we can't seem to find a bridge.
Right.
So we need to build that bridge. But to take it back to what Options does is, and who we are, is we just want a lever. We recognize that an unplanned pregnancy is possibly the scariest thing she's ever gone through.
Right.
There's isolation, panic, shame, amongst other things, just confusion in the world, not to mention the addition of hormones on top of that. And it's complicated, and it's layers and layers and layers of complication. To say, are you going to have the baby or not, just dumbs everything down, and it takes such a simple perspective, as though in just this one moment, she's going to really make the biggest decision of her life while having thoughts of panic and fear and trying to process, what is my mom going to think about this? How will I get money for the baby? How will I finish school? Will my parents kick me out of the house? I mean, just a million different thoughts coming at one time. And imagine if we just came at her and said, but are you going to have this baby? Or we came at her and said, but abortion is a sin, right? We don't sense that that's just not a way to be able to enter into a helpful space with her. Like we really want to make sure people understand we see the life of the baby and the mom as being equal. There's not one that's above another, and to say one matters more than the other would be saying, like, Pastor Shawn, would you like to breathe in or breathe out? You just get one. So God chose pregnancy to bring babies. We cannot separate a mama. There's no, we couldn't, if we wanted to, separate the two.
Right. And what you're saying too is that it's like you're bypassing her panic and her fear and her situation, when really the person we're looking at right now, she's looking right into our eyes. And if we're just focused on that womb, it's like, you don't matter. Your life doesn't matter. Your future doesn't matter to me. Now that you're pregnant, you're nothing to me. It's this life within you. And I think it was a podcast that Blayne had shared with me. They said researchers show that I think the woman, they were saying something like, when a woman finds out she's pregnant in an unplanned pregnancy, it is as if she's finding out that she has a terminal illness and she has a limited time to live. And if you, and so if that's the kind of like emotional and physical response that's happening inside of a woman, and if we would recognize that and treat her as if she just found out she has, 9 months to live, and start just comforting her at that level and starting a conversation there and letting it be all about her, you're actually showing mercy and kindness and reaching in a place that oftentimes we end up putting all these walls up because we're just like, I could care less.
Yeah.
You're dying. Yeah, you're right. You do have a terminal illness and I want that life in you. It's like if we don't see it that way, we're missing the big picture completely.
What I think I love most is that every time I've talked to either one of you, you see every woman as a person.
Yes.
And this isn't a program. It's not a product. It's not like you said, we got to get a result. It's caring about the individual, and I think that's why our church is so supportive and love how you approach each person, because every person matters here. And I know that's an overused phrase, right? And so then the other part about that too is what surprised me, which I didn't know when I got to know more about options, was that you also care for guys in this process. And that was something I've never heard of any other organization doing that. Okay, so now you think the woman's confused. Now you got a guy who's, and of course I'm a guy, so I always think of this part, which is the least of our worries. But but as a guy, most guys don't want to be involved, unfortunately. But there are some who do, and they really care, and they want to be responsible. And so what do you say to the guy?
Well, first I want to say that us inviting men into that conversation is fairly new. And it's, I would say the overall movement, the pregnancy center movement, we've grown a lot. We've learned a lot, and we're still evolving. And I think that's part of our evolution and why we redirected our name from Options for Women to Options Health, because we knew that by saying right there in our name, Options for Women, that we were cutting off half of the story, his story. And I also think we've done some damage in that we haven't allowed men a voice into this. I believe we've actually silenced men in a lot of ways, because what I'll hear in the counseling room, if there's a man that comes in and he is a supportive partner and he loves her and he's concerned about her, he's been trained to say, whatever you want, honey. Because that's a supportive thing to do, and it is her body. So whatever you want.
I know that's important.
That's important. But here's the issue with that. When he says whatever you want to do, without knowing it, we do this all the time. We say things thinking we're with the right heart, but it kind of comes off differently. It's saying all the pressure's on her to make a decision now.
Right.
I mean, now he's just saying whatever you. It's like saying, honey, where do you want to go to dinner? And he's, I don't know, wherever you want to go. But then they get there and they don't like the dinner or whatever it is, right? So I think it has to be a conversation, not just a whatever you want, because that's just pressure on her to make the right decision. And I will say that it doesn't always turn out well. And I have a clear example. This is probably the most heartbreaking example I've ever experienced at my time at Options Health, where a young couple called me after having an abortion. They had an abortion together. They called me because they were about to break up. She said, we're going to break up, but we want to talk this through and see if maybe we can resolve some of the things we're going through. Here's the crux of their issue. He said, whatever you want. She said, whatever you want. They came to the conclusion of abortion, but the reality is they both wanted the baby. And so here is an example of not communicating to the fullness that they should be, not having the deeper dialogue, not getting to the root of fears and the what ifs, and maybe even envisioning life with a baby, trying to kind of see what the different options are and actually walk each option out, because so often we just go to the option that seems easiest, the quick fix, and then we stay in that lane instead of kind of walking it out a little bit. And that's what we really want to help them do, is kind of walk out like 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, where are you going to be? And then to help them understand how potentially damaging an abortion is on a relationship. 70% of couples that go through abortion will break up, which speaks to the fact that there's this hidden, quiet shame that eats at the relationship. So that was an example of how it could have gone so much better, and they could have had a baby, but they didn't communicate well. And they needed help. And so we want to help them enter into that really difficult dialogue and to just unpack some things in a safe environment and see if any of that helps with their decision-making process. Because at the end of the day, we're not the decision makers.
Right.
We are,
and that's important for people to hear.
yes.
You're not here to tell them this is what you must do.
No,
Yeah,
not
because
at all.
whatever they decide, you're going to love them.
Correct.
And I think
Absolutely.
and there is trauma and struggle either way
Yeah.
in the situation. Because I know my wife and I have had a young woman who stayed with us, and the ones who have the adoption, there's a hard path there.
Yes.
The ones that have the abortion, they're still dealing with a lot of, I guess, hurt.
Yeah.
And so I think I want people to know that you are not here to make the decision for them, and whatever they decide, you will love them.
Yeah.
But you also have things that that are in place to help them. And so tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's important for people to know that that there are options, and that's why you're called Options, right?
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about that. So say a young woman comes in, she decides that she's going to keep the baby and put the baby up for adoption. That's those are two paths right there. Or versus the one who's decided to have abortion or has had abortion. So what do you say to each one? Because they're different conversations.
Where she walks through the door and she's maybe just taking her first pregnancy test, doesn't know what the result's going to be, or maybe she's taken it already. She's coming to us to verify that she is pregnant and does not know what she wants to do. The first thing we want to do is create space for her to feel, to experience whatever emotion she's having in that moment, and just give her time. And really, it's not in that moment. We're not looking for an answer like, well, what are you going to do? We're actually coming to her saying, how can we help you? How can we support you? How can we love you? We know this is hard. We know this isn't where you wanted to be today on this beautiful Monday, and that it's difficult, and nobody should walk through it alone.
Right.
And so that's our heart. And I can this is a great place for me to throw a little bit of my story in there, which at 19, I was pregnant. I'm going to college at San Francisco State. And my experience going to the health center was really one where I was isolated and alone. And I was alone with someone who ran my pregnancy test. I remember her being a gentle, kind lady. So she was in no way was she someone I would not want to trust. But her immediate reaction was to point me in the direction of an abortion clinic. And that is an option, but that really resonates with me, because I feel like the one thing I'm really upset about in that experience is that nobody sat and let me just feel it. Nobody let me just go through the grief and go through the shock. I mean, it was like, you got to do this now. And there was this almost urgency placed on me. And to back up what Audrey said in this podcast, where they were saying research shows that it feels like they're getting a death sentence, it was actually really a relief to hear that, because that's exactly what I felt. And I felt at 19, I wasn't mature enough or wise enough to see life yet. I mean, I was still kind of a baby in my own way. And all I could feel when she said, you're pregnant, and the way she said it, she said, you need to go get an abortion, made me feel like I had this time bomb on me. And that really led every thought I had after that. So I believe that giving space to unpack and just really feel things, and then we go into, can I tell you what your options are?
Right.
Okay, so now we're giving him space. We're saying, here are the options. Would you like to hear about this option? So every step we take is about her leading the dance, really.
Right.
So it's permission based. In other words, nobody's taking out a pamphlet on abortion and saying, you need to see this.
Right.
Right? It's, would you like to know about abortion? Would you like to know anything around that? Because I do believe that's something that is a right for them, but oftentimes in a clinic does not get discussed.
Right.
And I know for me it didn't. I had no idea what was going on with my body. I didn't meet the doctor. I didn't know the staff. I mean, it's very much like hurry quick, get out, because they're trying to make the experience as short as possible. And we want to make sure that if she wants that information, that she has it at her fingertips, because there are health risks. And we certainly aren't using any manipulative language. So we always check our language and we ask, is there any hidden message or manipulation or agenda behind this? Because if there is, we need to seriously put that under the microscope and make sure we dissect that out of the conversation, because Jesus never once manipulated.
Right.
And in fact, I find that the best way to meet with her and be with her and show her that you care is to be careful not to use too many statements or too many sentences ending in a period, but to use more that end in a question. If we could just
or even a
do
comma.
that, if we could just ask more questions and get more curious and let them lead that discussion and dialogue, we can enter into their story, because we've got a person in front of us that has a real story, a real, they're
just like you did.
Just like, image bearers, just like all of us. And we can't cut them down to just a woman carrying a baby, but, this is an image bearer carrying another image bearer, and we're going to carry for the one we see in front of us. And of course, we don't believe that abortion is God's best, but there are a lot of things that are not God's best that people do all the time, and we still love them.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I want people to see, is that by saying it's not God's best, it's not saying you don't matter or you're bad. It means that, this is a hard situation. And I think in our church, we have many women who've had abortions. And we don't want them to feel like they are second-class citizens. Ever.
Right.
And so at the same time, we're walking this fine line because we do value life. We do believe what Psalm 139 says, that before I even existed, you knew me. God knows us. God knew us, and you created me. You knew me long before I ever knew it.
Yeah.
We'll probably edit that because I said that horribly.
You knit me together.
We're gonna come back. Yeah. You knit me together in my mother's womb. And just to hear God's involvement in that. But at the same time, while we value life, we value the people who are before us. And I know what surprised me, Audrey, because your title is community educator. And so to hear that you're going to schools and talking to young women about this, and so tell me about the conversations you have, because I've been kind of surprised that it was very different, because when you've brought up adoption, that's been not a good thing for a lot of people. So tell me about some of those conversations.
Yeah, so I'm the community educator, and we have our Empower Ed program. So Empower Ed is a sexual risk avoidance program, and we teach everything from just the basics of sex, and we teach sexual health, and then we break it down with the students, pregnancy, all the different nuances of how to have a healthy relationship. So it's actually a pretty comprehensive program. But on the session that we get into pregnancy, we do spend a lot of time on fetal development, just so that the students are getting familiar with all the anatomy of sex, dating, how pregnancy happens, and then what's happening in the womb. And then we go through and discuss what are your options in the case of an unplanned pregnancy? Because sometimes pregnancy isn't a negative thing, but when it is not planned, it can feel very negative. And we talk through how, abortion is usually the first answer that they'll give. And then they'll usually talk about parenting, and then they kind of get stumped. And I'm like, there's another option. And I'll present that to them as adoption. And it's interesting because the younger generation, this is mostly high school students that will be in classrooms, whatnot. They don't feel like adoption is a kind option. They feel like they kind of hone in on the rejection edge of that. And I feel like what I'm learning, the more I'm in just the culture and just the dialogue and the conversation and the rhetoric of our generation, is that abortion is mercy. And that's really how it's perceived from our young people. And whether they're, in a church setting or a public school setting. It's pretty much across the board. Adoption doesn't feel like mercy. It feels like rejection. And so there is a big barrier there that often, even as Christians, we come in and we're thinking you either got to parent or adopt, but we're not realizing that young people see this as maybe they didn't have a father in their own home, or maybe their mother wasn't present. They were raised by their grandparents, and they feel the sting of that and the pain of that. And they're thinking, if I ever have an unplanned pregnancy, I'm just going to abort so that they don't have to feel what I felt growing up of an absent parent, or just not knowing that I'm wanted. This is really popular when I'm with the high-risk youth. I'm with the high-risk youth in Contra Costa County, and they really have to dialogue about that with me. So just like Blayne said, we don't come in there with all the answers. What we do with this education program is we come in with facts and truth. Just here's CDC, here's the facts, here's what the statistics show, and let's talk. And I just ask a ton of questions, because here's the thing: if we come in with our ideas and our doctrine of what we kind of want to stamp on their minds, that's not going to work. This generation is not about that. They really are thinkers, and especially our youth and our young adults, they want to dig deep and have some serious conversation about some of these big decisions they're making. And what I find is that the more questions I ask and the more I poke at their own worldview or ideology and just show that there might be some other ways of seeing it, they respect the conversation more. They lean in and they want to talk to me afterward. And where if I just came in and I'm teaching them what they need to think, they just start to tune me out. And so, it's difficult to see that's the reality of the conversation. But I think that even as our program develops and we get more involved with the stories, like having stories of people who have lived out and been adopted and had the positive side of that, is going to be really powerful. Because if they don't see it, they're not going to agree with me. And one time I even had a student raise his hand in the classroom, and he was like, I'm adopted. Wow. And it was the most powerful thing, because here we are dialoguing about it, and the students in the class are saying that's messed up, that kid's going to be this, and all this rejection. And now, there's another human being sitting here, right here with us, who was adopted, and we're just totally throwing out his whole life and saying that it would have been better for him to not have existed. And so it was just this powerful moment that arose in the classroom, that I was able to say, thank God you're here. And thank God you're alive. I didn't say that because I was in a public school, so I couldn't say, but I'm just going, I'm so glad you're alive. I'm so glad that you have a destiny in front of you, and you get to live. What do you think about that? And he's just like, I have a lot of dreams. And it was just very powerful. Yeah. And so what we don't realize when we're thinking adoption is cruel is that, now we have people right here in our midst who are among us, who were given life, and now maybe the parents couldn't do the work of parenting, but now this other human being gets a chance to live out their destiny. And I think that this is what we have to really do, is help paint the picture, tell the story, real people right here. Let's dialogue. Let's talk through why do you think that's cruel, and really process.
Get it away from theory and into reality.
Yeah. And then if they are on that's their conclusion, then I have to be willing to respect that.
Yeah.
Right.
At this moment in time, when I'm in this dialogue with this classroom, I have to be willing to say, okay, that's where you are. I respect that, and I'd love to talk to you more about it, but I'm not going to try to just tear down your worldview right now and tell you I'm right and you're wrong. It's not going to get us anywhere.
Over the years, I've had so many couples in my office who can't have children. And they want to adopt so desperately, and they're weeping, and they want this child to love.
Exactly.
And I remember we had a situation where a young woman who was pregnant met one of these couples. They have an open-ended adoption. The relationship is wonderful. The birth mom is so grateful that there's someone who can actually care for this child, and raise this child. And this family is great to have open communication. Other situations are different.
Yeah.
But I want people to see that there's so many people who are hurting because they can't have children as
Right.
well.
Mm-hmm.
And so all these play together. And
Right.
I realize that. And so I want to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so because I know, we here, are you pro-life or pro-choice? And we try to put it in a box and try to get everyone to commit one way or the other, and it becomes a political thing. And you said you don't even like those phrases.
Right.
That surprised me. Tell me why.
Something I've really have come to understand about myself over the years. So I've been at Options over 9 years and been in a lot of these conversations and felt like I need to be pro-life because that's who we are. We're pro-life. But then something in me was feeling as though it wasn't telling the whole story. Right. And I want the whole story to be told. And I think once we start to talk about pro-life, pro-choice, we start to get into words that really are marketing terms for two sides of this,
and
the
polarizing
line,
terms.
And polarizing,
yeah.
Very, very polarizing. And our heart is to bring people closer. Our heart is to model what Jesus did, which was to bring people closer. And I think we need to look at something that is compassion. The pro-life thing is just really difficult because I feel like it's saying we're all about the baby, or that's maybe what people are extracting from it, is that you care only for the baby. And then on the pro-choice side, what people are thinking that's being extracted is you're only about the woman. The reality is we are looking at them both, like I said before, as completely equal, that they're both completely equal. And the way that I've been able to just use the term pro-life when I do use it is to say I'm pro-life, I'm pro-woman, I'm pro-family, I'm pro-man.
You're pro-love.
Pro-love, pro-options, pro-grace. I think that's what we need to be, is pro-grace, and be able to give grace away freely and help people. Just like the minute we start saying we're pro-life, all of a sudden people have some sort of a thought about who we are and how we do things. And we do not believe that we should be telling people what to do, but that we really need to be able to give them space to make, like Audrey said, make their decisions on their own and to ask questions. And a lot of times when I think about the women and now the men that we see in our clinic, I think about Jesus with the woman at the well, and I go back to how he interacted with her, and that is really a model for how we interact. But then also the one most recently that's just been highlighted for me is the woman caught in adultery. And that one is really hits the mark because we've got here a woman where people are saying, we don't know what Jesus is writing. He's writing something, and he's saying the first one that to throw, that
has no sin.
Yeah, there you go. That's
Without sin, cast the first stone.
Thank you. That's why you're the pastor and you're the pastor. And they walk away one by one, and she's left there. And the one that can actually throw the stone doesn't. He gives her mercy and compassion, and that story, that is who I want to be known as.
Okay, so here's the thing I've noticed as you talk about this, because I'm with you. This is not a political thing, nor do we want to politicize.
Right.
We don't want to polarize.
Yeah.
But the word I've heard, compassion, mercy, grace, and from both of you, I want to say, okay, so for those who don't hear the word grace too often, and unfortunately there are a lot of people who don't, what is grace to you? What is grace to you? I want to know what you think about that. Audrey, what about you?
Wow. Well, grace is empowerment. Grace actually releases power to accomplish something that would be impossible otherwise, impossible without God. Mercy is the lifting off of the burden, the lifting off of the sin, the wiping away of all the things that got us here face to face with Jesus. But when his grace is delivered, it's like an empowering glory that comes upon a human being that allows us to do something that we could have never done before we met with him face to face. And so that can flow into all of the things we do, whether in every decision we make. And so when we come and we're walking with anyone in the world who's facing a moment of darkness or catastrophe, where the reality of this sin-stained world has touched them. When we release mercy and say, I'm not going to throw a stone, but here I have this hand of grace to you, we're actually offering Jesus Christ, who has power to forgive, to wipe it away, to change the future, to cause good to work out of something that's terrible.
Yes.
And we're actually saying, it's not in me to give you what you need. It's him. He's going to come and he's going to give you what you need. And all I'm doing is removing the condemnation, removing all of the barriers through forgiveness and mercy. And I'm just offering you what is possible through Jesus. And I think that when Jesus is giving grace, we see it the greatest on the cross. When he's taking all of it on himself and he's saying, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And he was willing to take all of the stigma, all of the punishment, all of the pain upon himself so that he could freely give power and forgiveness and a new start to anyone that would come to him. And so this is really what we see with the woman caught in adultery. And you know, we were just talking about this the other day with our own church, and you know, even with Blayne. And you know, this woman's caught in adultery, and she's thrown in the midst of a group of religious people. And all of this was done just to test Jesus and catch him in his mistake. Because they knew he was going to give mercy. They knew, these religious people were like, oh, this is the law. She has to die because of her mistake. And this guy can't do it. He's going to give her mercy. And we're going to be able to stumble him in the law. And now we're going to have him. And it's just profound, the wisdom and the beauty of Jesus, because he knows what they're about. And what does he do? He gets on his knees. He gets low. This woman is thrown at his feet. And everyone's standing over her, making a mock, trying to make a point out of what's true and what's right, out of her mistakes and her life. And that's what we can end up doing in the church as religious people, is that someone comes into our midst in our churches and is like thrown at our feet because they barely made it in the door, and we're trying to make an example out of her. And try to help everyone learn what's right and what's wrong out of this person's life. And that's just not Jesus. And anyways, they can't stumble him. He gets low. And I think that like mercy, we see humility and mercy in Jesus Christ, that when he's being asked to argue about right and wrong and what we should do with her and her mistake, he gets at her level and he hangs out with her down there. And they're all left standing.
That's good.
And this is the Savior we serve, the one that will get low into our place. He comes with us where we are thrown at the feet of the religious. And he hangs out with us there. And then he just silently, he's writing something we don't know. And it disarms everybody. It disarmed everything. You know, a kind answer turns away wrath. And so I think that this is what we need to see. The model, Jesus Christ, he gets into the place with them, and he's actually going to take her place. You know?
And see, that's the whole thing, whether it's Options Health, or even as we look at the church, you know, so many people think these are places of judgment and condemnation.
We've made the mistake.
And what I hope people see today is that these are places where you can come, whether you're hurting or in pain, and know that there's going to be people who love you just as Jesus loves you. And that this it takes away the stain of shame. Grace is that, you know, you say, why would I even deserve it? And you know, we said we don't know where we deserve it, right? But we've received it, and when you receive grace, when you receive forgiveness, it changes how you look at yourself and in your world and the situation you're in.
It's kind of like mercy's like he's taking off the rags, and grace is he's putting on a new garment, and he's clothing you with himself, with light and with life. And you know, we can't skip the part that when he says, I don't condemn you either, that she gets up and he says, now go and sin no more. And so he's perfection. I mean, he is grace and he's truth, because I know some will be listening to this that are still kind of like, but it's right. Abortion is not right. And it's like, yes, you're absolutely right. But we have to realize that we have to hold these two things in tension, just like Jesus did. He came and he was grace and truth always.
Right.
We can't do it as perfect as him, but we're empowered by his spirit to know how to walk in that with him on that tightrope. And you know, he didn't stumble in the law because he scattered everyone with his wisdom, and then there were not two witnesses to condemn her. If he would have condemned her at that point, he would have broken the law. So now he's just used his wisdom. He got rid of the crowd, and it's just him and her, and he's like, I'm not going to condemn you. But here's the thing. He already knew what he was about to do. He was going to pay for her sin.
Right. Well, and even when Jesus talks about sin, he's also saying, look, you were made for so much more.
Yeah.
You know, to have you identified by an action where you're feeling the shame and feeling rejected.
Right.
Jesus says, no, I love you, but I want you to know that I want you to see that you have value.
Yes.
You're not just someone to be used.
Yes.
And I want you to see yourself differently.
Yes.
And so much of this for us is about helping people see themselves differently, that they have value, that they have worth, that they matter to God. And God is not trying to say, oh, look how bad you are. God's trying to say, no, I want to show you there's so much more to this life than you are.
Yes.
Right.
And so this is so helpful. And also, I think it's important for people to realize that you also come alongside women who have decided to have an abortion.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of care, because whatever your decision, it's a hard road to walk.
Yeah.
And so, Audrey, you deal with a lot of youth, and you're going to schools and everything. So I want to hear about that experience, because there's very different perspectives on adoption versus abortion. And tell us a little bit about what you do and how that's played out.
Yeah, so I'm the community educator, and I've been with Options now for I think 4 years. It's been we designed the program Empower Ed from the ground up, and it's a sexual risk avoidance program that really fits our DNA and our heart, which flows with grace and truth. And we want to empower young people and parents with facts about sexual risk and pregnancy and how to prevent pregnancy and relationships and all of that. And so what we do is we offer this program to churches, youth groups, and schools, public schools and private schools alike. And we offer all of the resources that they're going to need to understand how to have a healthy relationship and then make decisions in the case of an unplanned pregnancy. And I love being with the students. Really, they're dynamic and they have tons of questions, but usually they're just so thankful for getting into the nitty-gritty and the facts and the details, and being able to ask honest questions about pregnancy, about adoption, about abortion, and parenting. And really, we come in with the open hand of, here's facts and information, let's talk. And let's start to ask the tough questions. And in that process, we're just giving them the ability to process the details. So even if it comes into a topic like abortion, we talk about fetal development, how many weeks abortion is, happening, up to how many weeks in California. And they start to take all of those facts and then ask questions naturally, and they want to dialogue. And oftentimes when we talk about adoption, they don't really think that's a good option. They think that's kind of cruel and it's represents rejection. But when we work through the reality of how none of these options are easy, none of them are, no matter what you choose. Right. So here's where we're all starting, is that none of these are easy. So immediately I just lift off the judgment and I say, no one's allowed to make a judgment and say someone else is a horrible person for doing any one of these, because whether you choose adoption or parenting or abortion, this person had to have the courage and the strength to make a decision. And so let's just now start dialoguing about what that looks like, how that could play out in a person's life. And I'm hoping that maybe you're going to see something in a different angle that you didn't see before I got here. And that's really my main goal, is to help them see fresh angles and different perspectives, so that when they're facing decisions or facing conversations, they have a greater understanding of what's really happening versus the perspective and the worldview they came in with, and no one's ever tapped against it. And so they get to tap against my worldview, I get to tap against theirs, and it's pretty dynamic and fun. With the parents, we love to empower the parents as well, because research shows that young people that grow up with the healthiest perspectives on sex and dating are young people who were in constant conversation with their parents. And so we try to empower the parents to get involved and be the main conversation starter with them, because that research shows that if that's happening from ages 9, 10, 11 and up, that kid is going to have a greater chance of walking out healthy sexuality and healthy sexual choices and dating and relationships and marriage all together.
So for those of
Yeah.
you parents with a 9-year-old right now and you're feeling a little nervous, relax.
time.
It's okay. It's time.
It's time to start.
We've got your back. So I just want to thank both of you for being with us today. And you are doing a courageous ministry that is about love. And we're so grateful for that. I just wanted to end, though, if people want to get a hold of you personally, because we want people to have options. Of course, we hope they come by our church and we'll be there and be available. But how can they get a hold of the two of you?
That's a great question. So I think the easiest way is probably via email, I would say, and calling us at the office. So I could leave that information for you. But my email is blayne.wittig@optionshealth.org. Super easy.
Mine's same, audrey.mccormick@optionshealth.org.
And we welcome conversation, questions. Come by the center, have coffee with one of us. We would love to keep the dialogue going.
Perfect. And that's the thing. Today we want to keep the dialogue going, and we just thank you for taking the time to listen. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care.